Right, welcome to Rambling Achieved. As you can see, it's the end of another month, which means we'll be going through the games that I beat this month. Um, a very, it felt like a slow start to the month, but ended up picking things up towards the tail end of it. Um, we had an event running in the Discord for JRPGs called JRPG January, so a lot of the titles I ended up settling on ended up being JRPGs, but there were a few other genres sprinkled in there. Um, I ended up starting because all we're going to be doing is ranking the ones that I finished, which is what I said last month is going to be the aim, not really shining too heavy a light on stuff that I've began and then put down. So like as you can see here running in the background, I am very deep into Code Vein 2, ended up not being able to finish it in time. And the same with Final Fantasy VII Remake, which launched, I think it was about a week ago now, maybe a little bit longer. So those are going to be probably trickling into the likes of February, maybe even March, depending on how quickly I can actually finish them. But right, let's kick things off with the very first title that I did end up finishing, and that is a game called Hotel Barcelona. This was a game that released fairly late last year and had a little bit of controversy tied to it. There was talks of AI art being used and stuff like that, and then on top of it being a sweary game. You can usually expect that it's clunky and probably not the best made product on the market, and that is definitely the case here. But it's really, really strange. It is a game that is made by, as I said, Swery. Also, Suda51 has been credited for the game's creation, so it's the two of their crazy minds blending together to make what is a 2.5D roguelite action game. Um, a very strange, bizarre combination. Um, because it's it's interesting when people who don't make loads of the same genre then take a stab at a new genre, because you usually see like weird mistakes that you wouldn't expect to see in a genre like this. Um, and that is definitely what is on display here. It's a really fun and enjoyable game that just has really terrible design. And I think I said the same thing about Deadly Premonition when I spoke about it on Brandon's channel last year when I ended up finishing it. And it's just, even with all of its terrible, terrible choices and balancing and just weird quirks, I can't help but love it. Like, this is a really enjoyable, poorly executed game. It just feels like a PS2 era game, just completely lacking any polish, but it's just fun to just blast your way through and experience what's on offer here. And it has a pretty interesting premise where you are, as you can see in the background, you're this young female who is a like federal marshal who's sent to investigate this hotel full of serial killers, essentially. And something ends up happening which sees you being possessed by somebody who's a I don't think he's a serial killer, he's just part of what's going on with the intrigue of the game, and his name's Dr. Carnival. So he's like a very bloodthirsty, very cold, calculated killer, and he's kind of like making your character be pushed down a path where it's things shouldn't be looked upon as like black and white. As you're searching for your father who was killed, and you're trying to get to like the bottom of it, and it unleashes into this web of intrigue is like the best way of describing it. And it's just really bizarre because the entire hotel's inhabitants are inspired off of classic like horror films. So as you can see here, like this is heavily inspired from the likes of Alien. You also have like, forgive me if I'm mixing this. It's either Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers as another one, and it's just that kind of vibe where it's pulling from classic iconic names, and then they end up putting like a spin on it to give it a little bit of a difference. And yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely different and it's definitely unique. It's just, yeah, this isn't going to be a game that many people will remember fondly, unfortunately, because it's just really tough to get into, because it also offers, in the same vein of like a Dark Souls like experience with a cooperative multiplayer element and a competitive like invasion mechanic. The game just, even when you're playing it yourself, it's, the frames are fine in single player, but the game feels a little bit heavy and unresponsive in elements. When you play in multiplayer, it's really, really poor, how bad it runs. Because I played with a friend, we got to like the second boss, and it was like pulling teeth. Unfortunately, you'd have like disconnect, desyncs. We'd enter like boss arenas like that, and there just would be no feedback of the other player entering, or and then it would spawn them in like a minute later while the fight's already commenced. And yeah, it's just a very messy execution. It's one where, much like Deadly Premonition, if you don't like and can't stomach flawed products, this just isn't going to be for anybody who can't do that. Like, it's a fun enough game. I enjoyed it, ended up beating it. I will probably look to potentially 100% it one day because I did really enjoy it. But this isn't going to be something that is looked upon fondly later down the line, unfortunately. So time to rank it, I suppose. So Hotel Barcelona, from like an enjoyment perspective, I'd say it's probably like a B plus. But as like an entire package, it is probably a C tier game. Maybe could claw its way into like the lowest tier of B, but I'll give it C. It's fairly highly priced, I think, as well. I think it was like north of 20 when it launched, if I'm remembering correctly. So they were asking, not obviously full price, but for how broken some of these aspects are, it is a little bit unfortunate. So I'll go C tier for that, and that will be the first one. Right, up next, it was Diablo 4 Vessel of Hatred's DLC. So this was a game that I beat last year, the main campaign, and then this DLC launched probably round about the time I think I beat the main campaign of last year, but I didn't want to fork up the full price for the DLC because I didn't think that it was a stellar experience. It was fairly flawed, I felt, and a little bit lacking. So they ended up announcing a paladin class and then another DLC that's coming out, and then with that there was a little bit of like, okay, cool. I do like paladins. They're probably my favorite like fantasy class. So that was already like a foot in the door. And then seeing that they bundled that first DLC with it, I ended up being like, okay, fine. You know, I do enjoy Diablo as an IP. It'll be interesting to see what has changed over these many seasons. And yeah, so I ended up picking up the pre-order for the upcoming DLC, which I can't remember when that is. But I ended up doing the Vessel of Hatred campaign alongside a friend in co-op with a hardcore character as the paladin character. And I gotta say, it's definitely the most fun I had in Diablo 4. The paladin character definitely suits all of my playstyle tendencies in an ARPG. It just fit with what I enjoy most from it. But similar complaints, man, of these games have really, really interesting story premises, really incredibly high quality cutscenes, as you can see, like what this is in the trailer. You're getting this in game. You don't get particularly much of it, but the same complaint I had with the original vanilla campaign. It's just left kind of still unresolved as a whole. Like you end up dealing with a threat, much like you did in the main campaign, but it still feels like you're kind of just plodding around and just not fully completing your task as a whole, which I don't know, it kind of leaves it to be a little bit anticlimactic. I do understand why they're choosing to do it at the end of the day. They have shifted much heavily more towards a live service path, so you don't want to have to create an entire backbone story premise every single time you're launching an expansion. But I'm hoping that with this upcoming expansion, at the very least, they can wrap up whatever this story arc is and then create a new one. Like, I'd be willing to accept if they wanted to do it in like 3 expansions worth for a story arc and then move on. Like, that would be like my limit. But if we get to the end of this next expansion and it still is just dragging its feet, I'm probably going to be tapping out of Diablo 4 moving forward. So yeah. Other than that, like, it's not, you can't there's not really much to say. You're doing the same stuff. Of course, it's a Diablo ARPG. You're going through dungeons, you're clearing stuff. I didn't feel like the difficulty was all that challenging. The only thing I can really say is that we were playing it in hardcore, and the friend that was alongside me for the journey unfortunately had his character get whomped in the very final dungeon, so he had to do the entire DLC again on his own. So that, at least there was that kind of humor to it, which you can always get in a hardcore like experience. But yeah, it's improved in some ways and has stayed the same in other ways, and has felt a little bit taking like a backstep in other ways. So it's basically not moved, really, at all from my feeling of Diablo 4, if I'm being 100% honest. So we'll get to ranking it, and I think it will go into the B tier for the sole factor that what I was playing was, if I had to play because I ended up making one of each class and just dipping into it ever so slightly to know what one I wanted for the hardcore campaign. And obviously I did end up sticking with the paladin. If that paladin wasn't in the game, I probably would be sitting in a C tier for feeling on the game. Like, that's how strongly designed that paladin is and how much I enjoy playing it. That original DLC character with the, I can't even remember what it was called. Whatever this Aztec like character's called, I really did not enjoy that. So if I would have had to sit there and play through that, it probably would have been D tier, if I'm being honest. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Given that it's already been paid for, I'll check out the DLC whenever that ends up launching in the next few months and end up checking it out. But we shall move on to the next game. All right. So the second game I ended up clearing for the JRPG January event was Like a Dragon Pirate Accuser. I ended up playing this at launch when it went last year and just didn't end up sticking with it. Um, Hold on one moment. Cat just wanted to go out. But yeah, ended up playing it when it first released last year, but didn't end up sticking with it. Um, I can't remember what would have been coming out round about then, but it just didn't. It didn't grip me. I had a very. Oh, how would you describe this? I didn't like the combat style that they went with in his pirate stance. It just didn't feel good to play, if I'm being 100% honest, and ended up being like, okay, like this is the only like it's not mainline, but it's tied to the mainline games that I haven't played and finished. So I was like, there's story beats in here that cross over with the mainline. I do want to have the full picture and know what's going on. Um, and I rate it really highly as a spin-off. I like many of the aspects of the game. I don't think this is Majima at his best for gameplay. I think there's been games where he's been a hell of a lot more fun to command and be in control of. The story was a little bit interesting. I think they're definitely beginning to struggle because they've moved away from the classic Yakuza storytelling approach of, it being a standard crime syndicate and then the drama that comes with that. They're kind of struggling to find something to grip onto, if that makes sense. They're being very experimental and thinking outside the box, making a turn-based RPG, and now they've made a pirate game and stuff like that. And that's all well and good, but I don't know how much further they can tap into that, especially with characters returning and stuff like that. It kind of diminishes the impact that these characters had, and that was like my biggest complaint with a certain. I'm not going to spoil it, but a certain plot point that they decided to go with, leading from Yakuza 6 into the new titles with Ichiban and stuff like that. I feel like they had the perfect closing point for many characters, and they've chosen to go back on that, which yeah, it's kind of unfortunate. Um, we're seeing, what is it, Kiwami Free getting a lot of controversy, and it's not being looked upon very fondly. The weird handling with delisting and then the director's cuts and the weird like refreshing of the other Kiwami games. They It seems like it's a transition period for RGG at the moment, and I'm watching closely, hoping that they can figure stuff out. But you also have one of the creators of the series originally setting off to make his own game. So if at the very least, that will come out and then they can compete against each other for the same fan base, and that can hopefully breed competition, because the Yakuza games haven't really had any competition at all. They've kind of just been their own little uh sub-series and even like genre in a way. Like they have many aspects of other games, but there's nothing that really tries to mimic it at all. Like the closest you got to that was when they did it themselves with Judgment. So it'll be interesting to see with him releasing that game as to what it will do as an impact for the actual mainline Yakuza series. But yeah, it was a fun little side journey. Definitely not firing on all cylinders though. So yeah, we will, and it's gonna it's funny because that sounds like it's been painted fairly negatively, but it's Yakuza as a series is just full of incredible experiences. So even like at its weakest for me, it's the very, very top of B, almost climbing into A. They just have a formula and style, personality, like everything. Just their games are incredible, really, really incredible, and yeah, it's just going to be interesting to see where they go from here. Right, and after I wrapped that up, because while I was actually in the middle of playing through this, is when the computer went kaput. So it kind of did put a. I could have probably slipped in one extra game of clears if that didn't happen, but unfortunately I didn't. And funnily enough, it was 9 Kings I was playing, and then wrapped up one of a difficult runs in the game that caused the PC to seemingly go kaput. But 9 Kings, I think I've spoken about it before. It's a base building mixed with a deck builder and tower defense esque. So you have these little grids where you're placing the cards that you gain each round, and then you have buildings which will give buffs or effects, and then you have units. And then every single time that you face off with enemies, it progresses forward a year. And you're just trying to get to the end of, I think it's the 33rd year is when the ending boss spawns, and then you technically beat that run. But yeah, it's just a very, very sticky and addictive gameplay loop, which I did beat the normal vanilla game, I think last year, and all this was there was a huge like set of updates which added, I think it's called adventure mode, where it's like little challenge scenarios. So I ended up going and 100%ing that is what I ended up doing, and I love this game a hell of a lot. But if I was to critique any part of it, is that new adventure mode is that it got a little bit stale when you got to the end of it, because it felt like a lot of the scenarios were just copy pastes and then reskinned. So it would have an idea for a challenge, but then every single one of these kings had that as like a challenge. It was just like I said, a reskin. So it's kind of unfortunate. That would be my only downside. It was cool experiencing the game again. I'm very much looking forward to more content. It's really cool. They've been adding new kings fairly frequently, which has been kind of cool. So yeah, I haven't really got much else to say upon it. Kind of spoke about it enough. If you know, you know. But yeah, this is an A-tier game, and that's not changed. I think A to S, it kind of flips between for me. It's an incredible, incredible Game Pass title. Hopefully they can bring it to consoles fairly soon. I think it's still in early access, which is why we've not seen it on stuff like PlayStation, and it's not on like the Xbox consoles. This was played through PC Game Pass. But yeah, really, really loved it. Really, really loved it. All right, up next is the final JRPG title that I cleared this month. So I think I managed 3 in the end, and this is Like a Dragon Ishin. So this was an originally, I think it was 2014, I want to say, that the game came out, and this is a spin-off title from the Yakuza series, just set in ancient Japan. I believe 1800s, I want to say. Could be wrong, but it's samurais, guns, and stuff like that. And it was a kind of interesting spin on the stuff that you would usually expect as like a setting. I know they've done a zombie spin-off as well. And obviously we've just spoken about the pirate spin-off. So they definitely do like to roll the dice and test little different things. I loved the setting, exploring the time period, but the combat didn't click with me in this at all. It felt very, very stiff and rooted. You could definitely tell this was around the time period of like Yakuza 3, 4, and 5 in its design. You're very, very slow. It feels you get punished very quickly. There's not much fluidity in your character. There was a bit of fluidity in the playstyle for the sword and the pistol, which was called Wild Dancer, sorry, which is what I used for the majority of the playthrough. Once I discovered that, when I was dabbling in the different attack types, because you have 4 different ones. You have punching, sword, gun, and then the sword and the gun. But yeah, it's just more of like what you'd usually love, because even with the combat being kind of stiff and struggling with it, especially like in the early first, I'd say 3 or 4 hours, I was just getting really, really punished a lot of the time, like taking tons of damage. As you can see here, like in one of the boss fights, just barely staying in there, it feels like, health wise. But yeah, the plot was interesting. The characters are pretty well written. It's a little bit strange that they decided to reuse characters that you've seen in the series before. Um, I guess that is one way to cut back on costs, is just use character models that you had around. So that was kind of interesting. But yeah, it's. I think if I had to, I would probably place this as the better of the 2 spin-offs between this and Pirate Yakuza. The gameplay is a little bit more stiff, but I enjoyed this much more as a complete package. I like it, just feels cozy when you have a Kiryu type character. Just feels like you're at home. So carrying a lot of his tendencies and his demeanor in this game is just, it just feels natural when you're playing these types of games and then you're interacting with characters. The mini game as well, where you run your own little clan thing, was a little bit strange. I don't think that was like perfectly executed. I think they do need to go back to the drawing board with some of their side stuff. I think some of the stuff feels, it's a weird way of like trying to pin it down, because you don't want to discourage them from trying, but some stuff feels like they try a little bit too much in some areas, and it does suffer. Um, and like that whole clan thing was just kind of, eh. I usually like their like side spin-off stories like that quite a lot. Like you had in Kawami 2, you had something similar to like a tower defense thing. That was cool. But yeah, not the biggest fan of what they decided to go for in this game. But as a whole, the game is really fun. Really cool story premise. Impactful moments and just really enjoyable from start to finish. Like, it didn't have... Usually when I'm playing a Yakuza game, you have like a very, very slow period, at least some point in the story, and it didn't feel like that was as present in this game. It felt like the pacing was fairly well done for the most part. So we'll go ahead and rank it. And it is going to be... I think I would personally throw it into the A. It'd be like a low A for this. Definitely not my favorite Yakuza-like experience that I've had played with, but definitely nowhere near the worst. Just a really, really strong entry. But I would definitely be happy to never play a combat in this style again. It's why I'm kind of a little bit worried of checking out like Kiwami Free, given that its bones is Yakuza Free, and I really didn't gel with that. So we will see. We'll see how that pans out. And then finally, this is just going to be a quick one. This is one that I checked out yesterday. It was added to Game Pass fairly recently. It was either yesterday or the day before. And it's a weird little roguelite where it's mixing in a deck builder and Tetris. And it's very strange. I appreciate them thinking outside of the box, but I had like really poor performance issues with this, unfortunately. Not sure why. It doesn't seem like it should really be a game that suffers all that much from performance issues, but unfortunately it did. And then the actual matter of like playing it, it just wasn't challenging at all. Like, usually when you have a roguelite, you either struggle to beat it the first time, or you get pulverized the first time to show you like, oh, here you go, you need to learn the mechanics, you need to upgrade, get better, unlock new characters and stuff like that. And they're just this... Once you understood, because I'm not even like that particularly good at Tetris either, and I wasn't even playing it optimally. It felt like I was making plenty of mistakes. But it's just very, very forgiving. And the way it handles the combat is that you're throwing down these like military cards and production cards, and they affect different grids on the board, and that helps you generate units and stuff like that. But it's all in a rock paper scissors way of handling the combat, where you get into combat with an enemy and then it's like swords counter arrows, arrows counter axemen, axemen counter swordsman kind of thing. And like, yeah, there just wasn't... I didn't feel challenged at all. The boss modifiers felt very tame. Because I did the tutorial, and it was obviously when you very first pick up something like this, you're kind of like, I don't know what any of this stuff does. But when I first did my initial actual proper run, I went from start to finish and didn't... I think in the top right here you can see out of 50, that's like your buffer health bar. So any enemy troops that remain after the combat phase will chip that down, and if that gets to 0, then you lose. I didn't lose any of them at all. So yeah, kind of strange. It's something that could probably do with a bit of tweaking. I'm not sure... Oh, excuse me. I'm not sure how far in development this is. I think I saw when I was looking it up, like Northern Lion did coverage on this 8 months ago, I believe. So it's been out for quite a while on PC. So it'll be interesting to see how this game evolves over the years, or if this is just going to be what it is, and then they're whatever this team is, they move on to the next thing. But yeah, I didn't think all that much of it, unfortunately. So I'm going to throw that into the C tier. It's a better made game than Hotel Barcelona, but I had a lot more fun playing Hotel Barcelona. So what I always value is the fun factor over the actual execution of a product. So unfortunately, that's gonna be there at the very tail end. No S tier ranks this month. I will say, had I actually finished Final Fantasy VII Remake or Code Vein 2, those would have probably taken the S rank spot. I'm I was enjoying Final Fantasy VII Remake a hell of a lot, and then Code Vein 2. I didn't think I'd enjoy Code Vein 2 as much as I have. I loved the first game, but I played it much later into its life cycle. So I wasn't expecting to love it as much as I have, and it's scratching all the right itches. It has its own problems, which I'll be diving into much later on when I end up beating it. But just the ambition on display from Bandai it has to be commended. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be selling particularly well. At least the numbers on Steam and stuff like that, it doesn't really seem to be setting the world on fire. It doesn't help that it has come out between the likes of Final Fantasy VII Remake on the Switch and Xbox, and then Neo 3 had its demo launch basically alongside it, so we'll see. But there we have it. That is going to be January's clears for the month. I can't remember how long. Let me have a quick look. I feel like I took a little bit longer this month in getting through this. Have I doubled the length? Oh no, it's about 40 minutes. Okay. I've shortened it. Damn. But yeah, cool. That's January done. If you somehow stumbled upon here before Brandon, make sure to check out the description down below. His channel will be linked. Make sure to check out his stuff. We do collaborative stuff from time to time, but he also does incredible solo stuff. And if you want to join a Discord with like-minded gamers such as yourself, make sure to pop a comment down below and I'll hit you back with the link. As I said, we just wrapped up the JRPG January event, and we're going to be casting votes on what the bi-monthly events are going to be. So for February, there won't be an event, but there will be one for March, etc., etc. So if that sounds like of any interest to you and that you'd want to get involved in stuff like that, as I said, pop a comment down below, and you'll get an invite to the very exclusive club of 25 of us. We're slowly growing, and it's really awesome. It's really awesome. I was a little bit worried in presenting the JRPG January event, thinking like I've been very relaxed with what constitutes it. I didn't want to be too ham-fisted and strict. I wanted to make sure that there was a very lenient so that as many people could enjoy the event as possible. And it's really cool to see how many ended up hopping into the event. It basically rivaled, it may have even surpassed Shocktober for attendance. So that's really cool. So thank you very much to everybody who did tune into that and get involved. It's really awesome. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.